Who doesn't love stories? Stories about kings and queens and knights and magicians. I'm actually not going to tell you a real story, but I'm going to give you a new way, a new approach to better understand one very specific and, I know, annoying German grammar topic, which is the sentence structure. So here it is. Those are characters we're going to use for each and every specific sentence element. And we call this the German sentence structure kingdom. And by the way, if you do like these kind of videos, if you think our YouTube videos are helping you to understand the German grammar and vocabulary and language in general better, you should definitely visit our website, YourGermanTeacher.com, where you can find self-paced German online video courses where you can learn wherever you are, whenever you have time, and you can also reach out to us. We answer each and every comment. So if you're interested, watch this video first and then go to our website, YourGermanTeacher.com. It's linked below in the description or at the end of this video. So, sentence structure, Satzbau. I'm pretty sure if you are at around B1 level or higher, you definitely have heard about this TeKaMoLo. TeKaMoLo. This TE stands for temporal and answers the question when. KA stands for why, causal. Und MO stands for modal, which answers the question how. Und LO is local, answering the question where. So this TeKaMoLo is actually kind of the normal sentence structure for all these kind of different four elements if you have a normal sentence without emphasizing anything. If you like this approach, if you want to know more about TeKaMoLo, we already have a video about this very in detail. You will find the link down in the description. The problem is with this TeKaMoLo, it is a very rough guideline, which is often ignored in reality, especially in spoken German. Because if you want to emphasize a certain element, you will actually change this order and you will not use this normal TeKaMoLo order. It has lots of exceptions and special rules, and one important thing you keep in mind, it's actually not common at all to have all those four elements in one sentence. So, we know the German sentence structure is quite flexible and annoying sometimes, I know. The good news, there are a few essential rules that can be applied in most cases. There's always exceptions, but for most cases, you will be correct when applying specifically those three rules. Nummer 1, Personalpronomen, personal pronoun. Nummer 2, time information. Und Nummer 3, Adverbien, adverbs in general. And this is what we're going to cover in this video. This is what we are going to use in the German sentence structure kingdom. Of course, every kingdom has a king, and every king needs a queen. And then we have the knights, which are here to protect the king and are around everywhere in the kingdom. And of course, each and every king and queen have their important advisors. So the big question is who in this German sentence structure kingdom? Der King, der König, ist das Verb, the verb. The Queen, die Königin, ist das Subjekt, the subject. The Knight is the object, and the advisors are the adverbs, the Adverbien. And they all have one thing in common, which is they all want to be as close as possible to the king. When we look at this in a normal sentence, in normal main clause, let's say, Hauptsatz, here the king, the verb is on second position. That's fixed. The conjugated verb in each sentence, in each main clause. We will talk about main clause and subordinate clause later on in this video, but in a normal main clause, Hauptsatz, the conjugated verb is on second position. That's the king. Then we have the queen, and the queen can be often found on the first position or right after the king. Of course, the queen wants to be close to the king. And then we have the object, the knight. And the knight can be pretty much anywhere in the kingdom because the knight has to protect the kingdom. But in most situations, you will find the object after the verb and not on the first position. And then we have the adverbs, the Adverbien, which are very special because they're also very flexible. But for example, the time adverb, temporal, is often found on the first position and or right after the verb and before the object. And lokal, a place information, is often found at the end of the sentence. So let's go back to this kingdom because there is one thing missing. Every kingdom, every famous story has one thing, which is der Zauberer, the magician. And the magician is very important in each kingdom for the king and the queen. And in the German sentence structure kingdom, the magician is das Personalpronomen, the personal pronoun. It has to be very close to the verb, to the king, because it is very important for the king. The magician is important. So it can be found right after or even before the subject. Like in this situation. So the Personalpronomen, the magician, is sometimes even more important for the king than the subject. And sometimes, because magicians, they have magic power, the magician appears in the form of the queen, of the subject, or it can also be appearing in the form of an object. That's the magic power of der Zauberer. Let's look at this in a pyramid of power. On top, of course, is the king, das Verb. Then we have subject und Personalpronomen on stage 2, level 2. So personal pronouns rank on second level and typically appear closest to the verb. And this is our first rule, which we will start more in detail, das Personalpronomen. An example sentence, pretty easy, simple example sentence. Ich gebe ihm meinen Stift. I give him my pen. Here we have, of course, the king on second position, das Verb. Subject on the first position, ihm, Dativ, Personalpronomen on the third position, so right after the king, and then a direct object in Akkusativ, meinen Stift, after the Personalpronomen. You can also say, meinen Stift gebe ich ihm. Meinen Stift gebe ich ihm. So you start with the Akkusativ, direct object, then the verb, second position, and then the subject, and then Personalpronomen. This is also possible. Not really common, as I mentioned before. Usually the knight is usually appearing after the verb, so not on the first position. But it is possible when we want to emphasize a specific sentence element. Talking about emphasizing, this is the bonus tip later on in this video. What about this sentence? Ich gebe meinen Stift ihm. Ich gebe meinen Stift ihm. So first position the subject, second position the verb, then first accusative object, and then the personal pronoun ihm. Number 1, number 2 is correct, and as you probably assumed, because it's in red, number 3, this sentence is wrong. But why? Because what I mentioned before, the magician doesn't want to be behind the knight. He is more important to the king, so it has to be closer to the verb, meaning before the knight, before this accusative object. So it only can be found there for this situation, like in the first sentence, first Personalpronomen and then accusative object, because the magician is more important than the knight. Let's do another example. Vielleicht bringt mir meine Frau einen Kaffee. Vielleicht bringt mir meine Frau einen Kaffee. Maybe my wife will bring me a coffee. Say in the morning, I'm still in bed. Maybe one day, hasn't happened yet. Here we have again, bringt second position ist das Verb, der König. Und dann vielleicht ist ein Adverb mir, Personalpronomen, meine Frau, Subject, einen Kaffee, the night, das Akkusativobjekt. The sentence is perfect. But what is special here, you see there you have this situation now where the magician is more important than the subject. And there is a rule for this. Because when you look closer at this noun, at this meine Frau, this is actually a normal noun. And normal nouns are kind of less important than pronouns. So let's say we change this meine Frau to also a pronoun, then it would look like this. Vielleicht bringt sie, she, which is meine Frau, mir einen Kaffee. And now we have the subject before the mir, the dative personal pronoun. Why? Because now we have two Personalpronomen. And when you have two Personalpronomen, then the queen is again more important for the king and comes before the dative, here in this example dative, or maybe also accusative Personalpronomen. So two personal pronouns, then the subject in nominative case comes first. Nummer 2, Regel Nummer 2, Zeitangaben, time information. We go back to the power of pyramid, the pyramid of power. And there we have this time information on this third highest level in this hierarchy, which means they often stand before or after the conjugated verb. But of course you have to be careful because there's also the subject and the Personalpronomen. But they're less important than personal pronouns and the subject. So let's look at this in an example sentence. Er ruft mich am Montag zurück. Er ruft mich am Montag zurück. He will call me back on Monday. Here we have the subject, er, second position, ruft mich am Montag zurück. Zurückrufen ist ein trennbares Verb, is a separable verb, that's why you have zurück at the end. Am Montag is the time information. This sentence is perfect. What about this one? Am Montag ruft er mich zurück. So here we start with the time information, then the verb, then subject, and then Personalpronomen mich. Also perfect. What about this sentence? Er ruft am Montag mich zurück. And again, you see it's in red. This means das ist falsch. Why? Because here, again, you see that this time information stands before the magician, before the personal pronoun. And this is not how this kingdom works. In the kingdom, the magician is always more important than the advisor, the time advisor here, the time information. So it should be first, like in the first example, first Personalpronomen and then the time information. Let's go to another example. Meine Frau hat mir gestern eine Uhr geschenkt. Schön. Meine Frau hat mir gestern eine Uhr geschenkt. My wife gave me a watch yesterday as a present. Schenken is to give somebody something as a present. Here we start with the subject, meine Frau. Hat, of course, the conjugated verb, second position, because this is actually the conjugated verb here is the auxiliary verb haben, because this sentence is imperfect, present perfect tense. So it's hat geschenkt. But the conjugated verb imperfect is always the auxiliary verb, which needs to be on the second position. First position, subject, meine Frau. Personalpronomen right after the verb, perfect. Then we have time information, perfect, and then the object. So here you see that the time information is actually more important than the night, which is how it should be. Time information is an advisor, and the advisor is more important than the regular nights, the objects. So you could also change it. You could say, mir hat meine Frau gestern eine Uhr geschenkt. So you start with the Personalpronomen, then the verb, then the subject, and then the time information, and then the object. That's also perfect. And you have also a third option where you start with the time information. So you can say, gestern hat mir meine Frau eine Uhr geschenkt. Gestern, first position, Zeitinformation, hat, Verb, zweite Position. Then, again, first magician, first as Personalpronomen. Why? It's coming before the subject because the subject is a normal noun, Frau. Therefore, first Personalpronomen, dann Subjekt und dann das Akkusativobjekt. Let's talk about Hauptsatz, Nebensatz. As mentioned before, I also want to explain you, because all the examples we just did was only for Hauptsatz. How does it look in a Nebensatz, in a subordinate clause? Zum Beispiel ein normaler Hauptsatz. Er ruft mich am Montag zurück. That's what we just had. That's the main clause. Now we can say, er hat gesagt, dass er mich am Montag zurückruft. Er hat gesagt, dass er mich am Montag zurückruft. He said that he will call me back on Monday. When we look at the main clause, you have this separable verb, so the conjugated verb, this normal verb of the separable verb, the verb part is ruft, is on second position in a main clause. In a subordinate clause, the conjugated verb gets pushed to the end, always on the last position of the subordinate clause. And here it's special because you see zurückrufen is a separable verb, but if it's in a subordinate clause, in a Nebensatz, then it's not separated at all. It is together. So zurückruft, am Ende. That's the most important part. It's on the last position. Now, what about the rest? When we look at the main clause and we just focus on everything except the verb, then we have mich am Montag. When we look at the subordinate clause, you have exactly the same thing. Mich am Montag. So the sentence structure in Hauptsatz und Nebensatz is the same. Only the conjugated verb, which moves to the end, which gets pushed to the end of the sentence in a Nebensatz, in a subordinate clause. One more example. Here, two main clauses. Er hat gesagt, er hat dich gestern angerufen. He said, he called you yesterday. Now let's make a subordinate clause of the second part. Er hat gesagt, dass, conjunction das introduces a Nebensatz, dass er dich gestern angerufen hat. Again, when we look at the verb, the conjugated verb gets pushed to the end in the subordinate clause, but the rest, er dich gestern angerufen hat, is exactly the same in both sentences, in Hauptsatz und im Nebensatz. So the sentence structure stays the same, only the verb gets moved. Nummer 3, Adverbien. Adverbs often appear in Position 1. They don't really have a fixed position and can move around pretty freely. Advisors. So they also have to go to different places in the kingdom and always report back to the king, so they can move around pretty flexible. But they cannot stand before personal pronouns and rarely placed at the end. Exception is Lokaladverbien. If you talk about places, the places usually are standing at the end or close to the end of the sentence. Zum Beispiel, vielleicht gibt mir meine Frau morgen einen Kaffee. Vielleicht gibt mir meine Frau morgen einen Kaffee. Maybe my wife will give me a coffee tomorrow. Never give up hoping. Here we have zwei Adverbien, vielleicht und morgen. Then we have second position, conjugated verb, der König, Personalpronomen, mir, meine Frau, Subjekt, morgen Adverb, einen Kaffee, the night, the direct object in Akkusativ. Can also say, meine Frau gibt mir morgen vielleicht einen Kaffee. Here we start with the subject, then the verb, then Personalpronomen, which comes before the adverbs, morgen vielleicht einen Kaffee. Or there is actually a third option, very similar, which is meine Frau gibt mir vielleicht morgen einen Kaffee. Meine Frau, Subjekt, gibt Verb, mir, Personalpronomen, vielleicht morgen, Adverbien, einen Kaffee. So, they are all correct, all perfect. But what is the difference between the last two example sentences? Because here first we start with morgen and the second one with vielleicht. So the difference is, it's pretty simple. Vielleicht here is putting emphasis on. Why? Because it's closer to the end of the sentence. And for the second example, the emphasis is on morgen. Meine Frau gibt mir vielleicht morgen einen Kaffee. And here the emphasis is on morgen. Why? Again, because it's closer to the end. Therefore, here we emphasize for this kind of second last position. Which brings me to the bonus tip. Betonung, emphasis. Let's look at a normal graph or a normal timeline of a sentence. Normal sentence always starts with a letter and ends with a full stop, einen Punkt. Two positions in a sentence can emphasize certain words. We have Anfang und das Ende. So we have two places which we use to emphasize words. Anfang, the beginning of the sentence, is the easiest and most common way. And at the end is often used in long sentences. Because in long sentences, there is usually a lot of information. And when you just listen, or even actually also reading, when you read a long sentence, or you listen, you hear a long sentence, the last thing you hear is the most important thing, or the easiest thing to remember. And that's why we use the end, or the last positions, to emphasize specific things we think is important, because those are the last words the listener hears. Let's make some examples. Ich gehe heute mit Freunden ins Kino. Ich gehe heute mit Freunden ins Kino. Normal sentence, kind of ich is the subject, most important part, put it in the beginning. But we can also say heute gehe ich mit Freunden ins Kino. And here we put emphasis on heute, so we put it on the first position. So we think the information heute is more important than ich, therefore we put it on the first position. You could also say mit Freunden gehe ich heute ins Kino. Possible. Less common, but possible. Or ins Kino gehe ich heute mit Freunden. Even less common, but grammatically still possible. But more importantly, to understand that in spoken German, this is kind of how we would answer the question, for example, mit wem gehst du ins Kino? Mit wem gehst du ins Kino? With whom are you going to the movies? In a normal, complete sentence, you would use the first answer here. Mit Freunden gehe ich heute ins Kino. Oder ich gehe heute mit Freunden ins Kino. But the question is really like, who are you going with? So the most important information of the answer is mit Freunden. So in spoken German, we wouldn't use this complete sentence. We would just answer mit Freunden. That's it. Not grammatically correct, but we like to keep it short when we speak. So when you hear somebody answering this question or asking this question, the other person, they might just answer with a name or mit Freunden, just like this. And for the second example or answer, this would be maybe the question, wohin gehst du? Wohin gehst du? Where are you going? So the place is the most important information, right? And therefore, we would just answer ins Kino, just like this, ins Kino. Or, again, the complete sentence would be, ins Kino gehe ich heute mit Freunden. Not really, again, this kind of sentence we wouldn't say. It's grammatically possible, but we would just answer, if the question is wohin, we would just answer with the place. I hope this helped you. I hope you learned something. I hope it helped you kind of understand this really difficult grammar topic more in detail, or in a different kind of approach, in a different way, not what you usually see in textbooks. So if you like this kind of video, please give me a thumbs up, Daumen hoch. And if you want to continue and learn more about TeKaMoLo, this is the video right here. TeKaMoLo all in detail. I hope you liked it. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Auf Wiedersehen und bye bye.